Thanks for joining us again, Thomas Kissinger, and we are once again going to take a stroll down memory lane. This will be Lessons from History, Part 3, and we'll be talking about the great early church father, Origen, and reading from the book of George Sarris, Heaven's Doors. So let's get right on into this and hear about this fascinating man and what he taught and believed about an ultimate restoration of all things through Jesus Christ. So this is Origen. The first system of Christian theology was composed and issued by Clement's successor, Origen, around the year AD 230. Origen was born in Alexandria about AD 185 and died as a martyr at Caesarea no later than AD 251. He was an eminent scholar, the most gifted, most industrious, and most cultivated of all the early church fathers. Even heathens and heretics admired or feared his brilliant talent and vast learning. Origen's knowledge embraced all departments of philosophy and theology of his day. Serious students of the Bible often like to compare various translations to help get a better understanding of the meaning of the actual biblical text. Origen did the same thing. He compiled an edition of the Old Testament that had 6 different versions placed side by side for comparison. And he did it by hand without the benefit of a printing press or the copy function on a personal computer. Prior to St. Augustine, Origen was the most influential theologian of the Christian church. One of the fundamental elements of Origen's belief was the doctrine of the ultimate restoration of all fallen beings to their original holiness and union with God. Like Clement before him, Origen was convinced that the absolute goodness of God, coupled with the persuasive power of his love, would ultimately result in all rational creatures submitting voluntarily to him through persuasion, not through constraint. In response to the age-old debate over which is more important in salvation, God's sovereignty or man's free will, Origen answered, yes, both are vital. Origen believed that God is able in the course of ages of time to work through people's free will to ultimately bring about their salvation. He does not force submission. God's enemies will be brought into the same kind of heart submission as his apostles and saints. People have often suggested that the major problem with a belief in restoration is that it doesn't take into account the seriousness of sin. You don't understand how much God hates sin, they've said. He can't stand to have it in his presence. Origen would agree and disagree with that position. Does God hate sin? Absolutely. Will he allow it to continue in his presence? Absolutely not. But the real question is, how will God deal with sin? God isn't going to just pack it up, stick it in a corner of his creation and let it go on forever. Origen saw that God would overcome evil by transforming the evil person, by removing the evil so the person is no longer an enemy. Here's a quote here from Origen. The destruction of the last enemy indeed is to be understood, not as if its substance, which was formed by God, is to perish, but because its mind and hostile will, which came not from God, but from itself, are to be destroyed. Its destruction, therefore, will not be its non-existence, but its ceasing to be an enemy. For nothing is impossible to the omnipotent, nor is anything incapable of restoration to its creator. Origen explained that God purifies the soul of its sins as a smelter's oven separates the lead from the gold. This leads to the destruction not of sinners, but of the evil that has filled sinners. Here's another quote from Origen. God consumes as a fire. He enters in as a refiner's fire to refine the rational nature, which has been filled with the lead of wickedness. and to free it from the other impure materials which adulterate the natural gold or silver, so to speak, of the soul. And in like manner, rivers of fire are said to be before God, who will thoroughly cleanse away the evil which is intermingled throughout the whole soul. If he were alive today, Origen would clearly agree with the comment that God hates sin, but loves the sinner. He had no doubt in his mind that sinners would be punished. But God's purpose for punishment are in keeping with the goodness of his nature. Let's read that again. But God's purposes for punishment are in keeping with the goodness of his nature. Elsewhere, Origen used the analogy of a physician. Just as a physician applies methods that sometimes appear severe to the recipient, so God, the great physician, works relentlessly in the lives of his created beings to ultimately turn their hearts freely back to him. As with Clement, at the heart of Origen's belief was the deep conviction that God loves and desires to save all, along with a fundamental confidence in his ability to carry it out. And ladies and gentlemen, that's really the heart of the matter. As we just read there, the conclusion that Origen came to was basically that God has the love to save all. He has the power to save all. Remember that God's love is unconditional. His power is irresistible. And he never gives up. That is the true gospel. That's the true message. And the early church fathers knew it. They knew the message. They knew the gospel. They knew the original Greek language. They knew the purpose of punishment and fire, wrath, vengeance, destruction, judgment, punishment, fire, hell, the lake of fire, all of these things. They knew all of that, and they knew the purpose of it. And it was for correction and restoration. And they knew God had the love, and God had the power, and God had the wisdom to do it all. And that is the ultimate restoration of all things according to Origen, the great early church father.